Every person of every age bracket has, of course, struggled in this pandemic, but perhaps none more so than Generation Z, who have now been rebranded Generation COVID. After being locked away during the best years of their life, only to return to a world of exam chaos, economic instability and a depressing job market, it's no wonder that 80% of respondents to a Young Minds survey in summer 2020 agreed the pandemic had made their mental health worse, with 67% in a January study believing the impact would be long-term. Ultimately, 80,000 more children and young people have been referred to mental health services between April and December of 2020, a shocking rise of 28% on 2019. So, how do we put the traumatised young back on track? I'm delighted to be joined tonight by Jenny Bristow, an associate of the Centre for Parenting Culture Studies, and her 17-year-old daughter, Emma Galland. The pair have written a fascinating book, The Corona Generation, Coming of Age in a Crisis, giving their different perspectives on the impact of lockdown on kids. So, Jenny, let's look at it from Mum's perspective first. What do you think the impact has been? I mean, we obviously heard the stats there, but what's the human impact on what we've done to our young?
I think the rise in mental health difficulties is kind of clearly real and evidence. I don't think that's the only way of looking at it, though, because I think part of the problem with the way that we as a society have treated young people throughout the pandemic is that it kind of implies that it's like they're separate to us, that it's just a problem for them. And I think the big impact is that really it's more like a moral failing, where we have failed to bring young people into our society and to say, look, this is something we all need to deal with. And instead, we've kind of kept them aside, treated them as though they were a big risk to us, taken our responsibilities to them very lightly. And so I think more the kind of general problem is one of, for young people, one of sort of disorientation, a bit of cynicism, kind of why should we bother? And a sort of sense of not knowing what's next, what's going to happen next month, next year, which, 18 months on is a really big burden, I think, to put on our younger generation.
Indeed. Emma, so you're 17. Tell me about how the COVID crisis impacted the life of you and your friends.
Yeah, so I was in year 11 when the crisis, I guess, hit. So we didn't have our GCSEs and are now doing our end of year of A-levels. And there was obviously a psychological impact on the relationships between people, especially the way we interacted with people. I think the first time we really had maybe disagreements about how we went around our lives to do with like the caution we took over the measures and the extent we played by the rules. But also educationally, it has had quite a big impact on the way we value our education and the motivation we have to educate ourselves, as missing out on that time has disproportionately affected those who couldn't have access or didn't have any guidance during the time that we should have had.
Totally. And Jenny, you say that in education, which obviously is the world that you know best, people seem desperate to embrace this new normal for some reason and seem to be opposed to returning to the socialisation that youngsters so clearly need, because let's be honest, adults need it too.
Yes, and it's odd, because I think some people are desperate to get back. I think a lot of kids, I think a lot of parents, I think a lot of teachers as well. And, some head teachers. It really depends at the moment what your school's doing, if you like. There seems to be an enormous variation with the way that schools are behaving right at this moment. But the problem is that we're lacking a kind of a narrative to say why we need this. That's the thing. Anyone who says, well, look, we should get back to normal, it's no good to be teaching in masks, that's ridiculous. Kids need stability. They need to just kind of come in. We can't, anyone who works in education knows that in the autumn, people are ill. with colds and this, that, and the other. And, we can't just kind of keep grinding to a halt every time, there's a sort of a suspicion that somebody might be ill of something. And that kind of idea is it's almost like that's seen as a bit weird if you say that, even though that's what a lot of people think. So I think there is a divergence between the kind of narrative of, I think the teaching unions have been terrible on this.
They
government
have been appalling. They've been despicable.
But they don't represent what a lot of teachers and educators think. And that's
not all teachers, absolutely. I completely agree with that. Emma, a lot of young people in my life who I speak to talk about this feeling of having opportunities taken away from them, their future torn apart when it comes to opportunities like travel, for example. Young people know that there's only one chance to do that. Do you feel like you've had opportunities unnecessarily taken away from you?
Yeah, travel is definitely one of the most immediate ones, especially with the whole idea of the vaccine, because I think a lot of people our age kind of feel like they're in a trap where there's the idea of having to have vaccines to go and not quarantine, but not quite being old enough to get the vaccine. And if you do get the vaccine, this whole debate over whether you should be able to decide your own vaccine or whether the vaccine is actually worth it. Like, it all seems like it's on the political agenda, but it's not really taking into account the effect this has on people our own age. And I think in a broader sense, the whole idea that our futures has been taken away is more about the disruption it's had on how we view our place in society and the passage we're supposed to have to get there, and the fact that that was completely disrupted and that time could not be given back in any way. Like, the education we would have got wasn't the same, and we can't backtrack. It's like we're expected to move on, but there's no clear way we can do that. So I think it's more about the stability in the passage rather than what directly has been taken away from us.
Put that beautifully. You put that beautifully. Look, I want to bring in my superstar panel now. Tonight, it's the columnist and broadcaster Carol Malone, the senior reporter at the newspaper Benjamin Butterworth, and the social commentator Esther Kraku. Benjamin, let me come to you first. What do you want to know?
Well, Emma, it was so interesting to hear from you as someone that's been going through this while at school. Among your peers, the fellow pupils, is it a particular sort of person that has really struggled to cope with this, was what I wanted to ask. But also, has it made people, do you think, be less ambitious, be less confident of themselves as a consequence of all this disruption?
I think definitely for my year, with the people that are less academic and found school quite difficult to motivate themselves, I would say maybe more like the art students and everything like that, because although it's quite easy if you're interested in reading to pick up a book and kind of go broader than the curriculum, if you're not motivated in the first place, the role that education had in inspiring people in those different avenues and different ways to get involved for their future to build on their skills, they weren't there. So they kind of gave up and were thinking, if I can't do this, what else am I supposed to do? And there was no talk of what else they could do, because it was so focused on the direct examinational impact on them.
Carol Malone.
Emma, hi. I want to ask you, and it's a personal question, you can tell me to mind my own business, but have you suffered mental health issues personally, and has this changed you? Tell me how this has changed you personally.
I think in the first lockdown, the mental health was probably more difficult. I would say probably the anxiety was quite high, because there was that complete lack of, I was in year 11, and so the idea of not having exams and then being expected to go into year 12, and there being such a long gap, it was maybe 6 or 7 months where really there was no contact between any school for year 11 and year 12, because they didn't really know what to do with us. They couldn't teach us anything. We had done our GCSEs, and that really had quite an impact, because it was not only were we in our house, but it wasn't like we had a job. We didn't have anything to do. So it
But
felt like we
I'm
were
talking
completely-
about you personally. Has it affected you in ways that you think it's going to be a long time, or maybe never, that you can go back to the person you were before the pandemic?
I would say that for myself, I think I struggled a little bit with anxiety before, and that I don't think it heightened a sense I can't go back. For me, being quite interested in academics, like I actually found a lot of what I was interested in the pandemic. I didn't really start doing writing or research until I wrote the book. So for me, it was beneficial, but I think for many others it wasn't.
That's a kind of catharsis for you, isn't it, writing this book?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, it's been something positive has
Yeah.
come out of it too, which is really great. There it is, actually, the Corona generation coming of age in a crisis. There's the cover. Esther Kraku.
Hi, Emma. I just wanted to ask, what worries you the most, sort of, in terms of future projections? What do you think is going to stay with this generation as a result of this pandemic? Because I think I'm the closest person to your age on the panel, and for me, I'm just saying.
You certainly don't look at Esther. Joking.
How dare you?
I'm joking. Sorry, Emma, I'm being silly. Esther's very young, apparently.
Oh, thanks. But yeah, I mean, what do you think is would probably stick with this generation as a result of this pandemic?
I think probably the idea of like the lack of control and the lack of stability, like the idea that all of the goals that you had might not be there in 2 or 3 years' time. And I think that was a trend that was happening before the pandemic. It's been seen in the labour market, in the way that education is going. It's been seen, but it was never really made as obvious as it was during the pandemic, where everything was taken out of the control of people and into the hands of like the state and those who had the power. Like that disparity was so evident. And I think that people won't forget that easily.
No, we won't. We won't. And I think that applies to adults, but I think it especially applies to young people who have key years of their lives to come. And how can any of us ever plan for the future now, or say we're going to take a year off to travel and see the world, or we're going to take a career break, because we simply cannot guarantee that the state won't take back these powers, as you say, to lock us down. Well, look, it's absolutely fascinating. You're clearly going to be a future star, Emma Gilland, 17 years old, and you've written this brilliant book, The Corona Generation Coming of Age in a Crisis. Thank you so much, and thank you to, of course, to her brilliant mother, Jenny Bristow, the Senior Lecturer in Sociology at Canterbury Christchurch University and an Associate of the Centre for Parenting Culture Studies. Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.